Everywhere you look, Europe's streets, American campuses, social media feeds, you can feel it. Islamization, a cultural shift that didn't happen by chance. It's not spontaneous and it's not random. For nearly a century, one movement has been quietly shaping the ideas, networks, and institutions behind everything. The Muslim Brotherhood, banned across the Arab world but thriving in the West. It's the organization that not only built Hamas, it's inspired modern Islamism and learned how to use democracy against itself to spread a crazy radical ideology. Arab regimes like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the UAE have seen it for what it was and is a political revolution disguised as religion, and they outlawed it decades ago. But in London and Brussels and Washington, the same movement has been welcomed as a network of civil rights groups and community organizations. The Middle East is banning it, and the West is legalizing it. And that's how a movement too dangerous for Cairo ended up shaping our media, the European world, influencing policy and infiltrating universities under a banner of diversity. And if you fight back, it's Islamophobia. This isn't paranoia, it's patience and a strategy that has been built on migration, organization, and our silence. It's been working quietly for almost 100 years, and we need to talk about it. This is the Meira show on JNS TV. Let's dive right in. To begin, you need to understand the word Islamization. Islamization means the process by which a society begins to adopt or conform to Islamic norms, not just in religion, but in law, culture, and governance. And if you don't like that, you're not alone. In modern political terms, it's the effort to shape secular institutions so that they reflect Islamic authority. It's not simply about being more religious. It's about transforming a society from a Western one to an Islamic one. That idea comes straight from a specific belief that Islam isn't just a faith, it's a total system, a framework meant to regulate every part of everybody's lives. This belief is rooted in Quranic verses that Islamists quote constantly. For example, "He it is who sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth, so that he may make it prevail over all other religions." Not only do Islamists have to believe Islam, but they have to prevail over all other religions in the name of Allah. In classical theology, that verse means divine supremacy, that God's law should not just guide Muslim society, but all of us. And the Brotherhood have interpreted this politically. They argue that Muslims everywhere, even as minorities, have a religious duty to restore Islamic governance, not just locally, but globally. And this is where two key ideas come in: hijra, or migration, and dawah, religious outreach. In early Islam, the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina, the hijra, marked the beginning of Islamic statehood. The modern Brotherhood saw this as not just a story, but as reality. They argue that Muslims migrating to the West should do the same thing: build self-sufficient Islamic communities that would slowly influence their host societies, and they called it a civilizational duty. Migrate, build, and influence. This is how Islamization moved from a theory into a strategy. It wasn't about converting people by force, it was about creating parallel communities that would one day just take over the mainstream ones. And FYI, why do they focus so intensely on Israel and Europe? For Islamists, Israel is not just a piece of land, it's a theological and political symbol. It represents Jewish sovereignty in a region that should, as they believe, be governed by Islamic law. According to traditional interpretations, once a land was ruled by Muslims, it remains Islamic land forever, even if they lost it in a war. That means it must eventually be returned to Islamic control. The territory of modern Israel was ruled by various Muslim empires during the last 1,200 years, most recently the Ottoman Empire, and because of that history, many Islamists view the entire land as part of Dar el-Islam, that land that must never permanently belong to non-Muslims. By the way, that's why the Muslim Brotherhood created Hamas in 1987. It's their Palestinian branch. Hamas took the Brotherhood ideology, Islam as total governance, and added militant jihad into it. Their founding charter literally says they exist to raise the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine. It's the same ideology, just expressed through war instead of institutions. And what's going on in Europe? Well, Europe is the test case, but more on that in a second. Let's begin at the beginning. The Brotherhood was founded in 1928 in Egypt by Hassan el-Banna, a school teacher who believed that Muslim world had decayed under Western influence. He saw secularism and colonialism and the modernity as symptoms of spiritual decline. His answer was to rebuild from below through education, social welfare, and personal reform until society would once again live under Islamic law. Sharia law. Doesn't that sound wonderful? From the start, the Brotherhood blended grassroots charity with political activism. By the 1940s, it ran schools and hospitals and businesses. It preached moral revival, but also built militias and political cells. Al-Banna insisted that the Brotherhood was a Salafia message, a Sunni path, a political organization, a sports group, a cultural association, an economic enterprise, and a social idea, all combined into one. And if that makes you really uncomfortable, yeah, you're not alone. That phrase really became the DNA of the movement. Religion fused with politics, service to the community fused with power and manipulation. When Egypt's monarchy and later Nasser's nationalist regime cracked down on them, many members fled, and from the 1950s onward, exiles resettled in Europe, the Gulf, and North America. These exiles were highly educated doctors, engineers, and teachers, and they quickly began establishing new institutions abroad. We tend to think of these people as, the underdogs, but no, it's much more sophisticated than that. In the Gulf, they staffed schools and universities, helping to spread their ideology through the emerging oil states. In Europe, they created Islamic centers in Munich and Geneva and London, which became training and coordination hubs. In the United States, which is now rife with sleeper cells, they established the Muslim Students Association in 1963, which later gave rise to groups like ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, and CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations, groups that are totally legitimate but are actually the Muslim Brotherhood. By the 1970s and the 1980s, the Brotherhood was no longer a single Egyptian movement, but a global network, loosely connected by ideology and personal ties, rather than a command structure. It had evolved into a project, used the freedom and institutions of open societies to build parallel Islamic structures that would, over time, shape the mainstream. Once the Brotherhood's leadership had scattered across Europe and North America, it began thinking systematically about how to operate inside non-Muslim societies. You see, 50 Muslim states was not enough for them. Two internal documents capture this mindset more clearly than anything else that has ever really surfaced. And you kind of really need to understand them to understand everything that we're seeing right now. Number one, the project. In 1982, Swiss authorities raided the home of one of the senior Brotherhood financiers and discovered this 14-page Arabic memorandum known ever since as the Project. This document isn't a manifesto about violence, which is what we would normally associate with this kind of stuff, but it's actually a manual much scarier. It's about social and institutional penetration. Its purpose is to outline how Muslims living in the West can build permanent structures that will eventually influence or even guide and control the societies they live within. The text lists roughly a dozen lines, but we're going to cover the main ones. Build comprehensive Islamic organizations like charities and educational institutions, youth clubs, women's groups, so every social need is met from within the community. Coordinate activities across borders so that each national branch supports each other. Train promising young Muslims in both religious sciences and modern professions, then place them in public institutions, media, and politics. Sound like Mamdani? Yep. Engage sympathetically with existing Western movements, even if you don't agree with them, like human rights groups and anti-racist campaigns and churches. Whenever alliances can advance Muslim cause, and they do this under taqiyya, the concept that for their religious beliefs, they can just lie, flat out lie, publicly. They've established media outlets, Al Jazeera, and translation centers to communicate the Brotherhood's worldview in European languages. They keep Palestine and resistance to Zionism as the emotional center of global Muslim identity, and this is obviously really interesting. One of the main things in their charter is keep Palestine as the center focus of the entire world. Obviously, to make sure that they're not focusing on the problems in their own country. In addition, develop intelligence capabilities, information networks able to track political trends, opponents, and funding opportunities, right? Like Tucker Carlson. Constantly evaluate progress and adapt to changing laws or governments. What's the newest thing? Gays for Palestine? Let's support it. Nowhere does the project call for terrorism, and it's actually so scary. Its focus is just cultural and bureaucratic, and that's what's actually made it very effective. This is where they separate from Hamas, who try to combine terrorism and cultural manipulation. And honestly, they've also been successful in that. There's a second thing that you need to know about, which is the 1991 Explanatory Memorandum. Nearly a decade later, another internal paper appeared, and this time in the United States. It was written by a man called, can you guess it, Muhammad, a senior Brotherhood member, and entered into the evidence during the 2008 Holy Land Foundation trial, which, if you don't know what that is, it was the largest terrorism financing trial in the US history, in which it became clear to the world that leaders of the Brotherhood were convicted of funneling millions of dollars to Hamas, the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, under the guise of humanitarian aid. And we know all about that. But this proved the link between the Brotherhood and actually really, yes, supporting terrorism. But back to what they found. The title is long, and it's a bit of a tongue twister. The Explanatory Memorandum on the General Strategic Goal of the Group in North America. Yes, I memorized that. But its core idea is simple: to enable Islam in North America through a civilization jihadist process. And if that sounds like a contradiction, it is. Muhammad describes a gradual transformation in which Muslims, acting through lawful institutions, reshape the surrounding culture so that Islamic norms become accepted public standards, like a hijab. He provides two kinds of detail. First, a list of existing organizations regarded as part of the movement's friends. Second, a 10-point operational plan. By the way, we as the Jews and Israelis have a lot to learn from this. If you're ever wondering why their attacks on us seem so coordinated, well, it's because they are. And here's just some of the things that they push for: unifying the landscape, coordinate mosques and student associations, charities, and advocacy groups under one strategic umbrella so that their resources serve the same long-term objective. Using the same terminology, they create permanent community anchors, build Islamic centers that combine prayer spaces, schooling, and social services and legal or media offices. These become hubs for both religious life and civic misrepresentation. They present umbrella bodies as legitimate spokespersons. Terrorist organizations will be the people that speak to governments and journalists who always need someone to speak for the Muslim community. By being organized first, the Brotherhood-aligned groups fill that vacuum. Interesting, no? Cultivate leaders and professionals, train imams and teachers and journalists and lawyers who understand Western institutions and can navigate them effectively. Infiltrate from within. Leadership training is political education. Dominate education and youth. From weekend schools to university societies, controlling the curriculum and student culture shapes the next generation's worldview. They're focusing on the young because that is the future. They engage in politics deliberately, build relationships with sympathetic politicians, participate in consultations, ensure that the community perspectives influences legislation and funding. If you're wondering why the pro-Palestinian movement has seen so much support from American government people, control public narrative, establish media platforms and spokesperson who define criticism as prejudice. You say anything against radical Islam and you're Islamophobic, but all the time they're presenting Islamic goals as mainstream civil rights concerns. Al Jazeera totally normalizing terror, but seen like the CNN or Fox News, just a normal media company. Use the Palestinian issue as a moral engine. Mobilize Muslims and non-Muslim allies around the imagery of occupation and resistance, because in the name of resistance, you can do anything. You create an emotional link between global Islamism and Western left-wing activism. It's deranged, but it works. Another pointer which is important: achieve financial independence, develop businesses and endowments and charitable trusts that can fund movement activities without reliance on hostile governments, like a flotilla, exploit legal systems, use constitutional rights, and this, guys, is the craziest one of them all: freedom of religion and speech, to protect Islamist activism and to challenge opponents through lawsuits and administrative complaints, meaning use the democratic system against them so that they can come in and turn it into Islamic. If that sounds like Hitler using the democracy to turn into a dictatorship, it's not for nothing. The language is very bureaucratic, but the intention is super ideological. Create parallel institutions that eventually acquire mainstream authority. This is why scholars often describe the Brotherhood's approach as entryism, entering institutions, not to integrate, but to influence them from inside. These two memorandas are not ancient relics. They sound similar, and that's because they are. When investigators look at how Islamist networks operate in Western capitals today through charities and educational trusts and lobbying coalitions and media offices, they find the same exact architecture that are sketched in these texts. They matter because they reveal a philosophy of power that is patient, it is slow, and it is bureaucratic, and it's something that most people just wouldn't notice. The Muslim Brotherhood realized that modern democracies could be shaped more effectively through civil institutions, right, than through active confrontation and terrorism. SJP, Students for Justice of Palestine, could do more for sympathy than, let's say, 9/11. Across much of the Arab world, that lesson has become a threat. The Brotherhood's goal of replacing secular authority with Islamic governance, like Sharia law, has challenged every regime. After the Arab Spring, the danger actually became super real, and in 2011, the Brotherhood took power in Egypt, only to be overthrown 2 years later. By 2013, Egypt's army had banned the movement as a terrorist organization. Soon after, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain followed suit, with Jordan and Kuwait imposing heavy restrictions on them, because again, the Muslim Brotherhood, also seen as a normal group, are actually terrorists. These governments understood what Western leaders are still hesitating to admit. The Brotherhood doesn't compete for an office in a certain country, it's trying to take over civilization. This is the ideology that gave birth to Hamas, which was founded by a Brotherhood leader in Gaza. Hamas's charter calls Palestine an Islamic Waqf, a sacred trust never to be surrendered. It took the Brotherhood's belief in total Islamic governance and merged it with armed jihad and anti-Semitic theology. Where the Brotherhood pursued institutions, Hamas chose warfare. But the ideological DNA is absolutely identical. This is why Egypt doesn't want any Palestinians coming back to their border. The Arab regimes crushed the Brotherhood to protect their own sovereignty, but Europe and the US did the opposite. Western democracies, bound by freedoms of religion and association, legalized and even funded Brotherhood-linked organizations under the banner of multiculturalism and civil rights. No government wants to be accused of Islamophobia. So when the Brotherhood was driven out of the Middle East, it simply just reestablished itself in London and Washington, and it embedded itself in NGOs and media and advocacy networks. The irony is striking. A movement too dangerous for Cairo is now shaping public policy and campus discourse in the West, and migration has accelerated its reach. Millions chose Europe over dozens of Muslim-majority states because Europe's borders were open, welfare is generous, and assimilation is optional. Conditions tailor-made for ideological expansion. The massive immigration flux is not random. Remember, it's an ideological belief for them. They could have gone to any of the Islamic countries, 50 of them, but no. And obviously, as migrants arrived, practical needs like schools and housing and mosques and legal aid created an opening. The Brotherhood filled it because the governments couldn't. Decades of organizational experience allowed its charities to step in faster than any state agency, providing real help, but also a worldview. Governments lacking integration strategies outsourced community representation to these same networks, turning grants into long-term partnerships. Over time, religious organizations evolved into political lobbies. We need to recognize how policy failure has enabled this ideological capture of the West. Migration supplied the people, but it was the institutions within these countries that then organized them. Weak integration, weak assimilation into Western ideology let Islamic ideology fill that vacuum. After World War II, European nations imported labor from their colonies, assuming the workers would return home. They didn't. They settled and raised families and formed distinct neighborhoods that became parallel societies. Dearborn? Most immigrants sought stability, but organized movements saw opportunity. Because states were failing to integrate the youth, Islamists stepped in, using Europe's openness to shape it from within. The multicultural model, such a bad model, assumed each group shared the same civic values. You come to Europe, you want to be European. But in practice, it empowered the most organized voices, often the Brotherhood-aligned NGOs, to become the de facto representatives for the Muslims. Registered as nonprofits, they presented themselves as partners in integration while actually telling the youth to resist assimilation. Municipalities hired them for youth programs. Schools consulted them for religious issues. And soon they controlled access to grants and policy discussions and media framing. Criticism has always been silenced as Islamophobia. And anyone, journalists, teachers, Muslim reformers who tried to speak out were ignored or completely punished. Fear drove policy. By 2010, the cultural consequences were impossible to hide and still are. Holocaust lessons were dropped from classrooms under threat. Police ignored grooming gang scandals, which are still going on till this day. Journalists were self-centered because they didn't want to be deemed Islamophobic. Moral disarmament had set in. Europe, ashamed of its past, confused tolerance with surrender. Now, anti-Semitism surges openly. Do you guys remember what happened in Manchester? Campuses glorified terror. We're seeing thousands of people march the streets. Western governments still fund these same groups they once warned about. The result? We have a new culture of fear. Europe keeps empowering the same networks. Migration continues. Birth rates diverge because they have lots and lots of children. And leaders debate semantics in office instead of actually building policy to drive this out. Instead of fighting against the rise of terror, they look for someone to blame. And surprise, surprise, they come to Israel. Whilst this may feel hopeless, I really do feel you. If we have any chance of saving our countries, it starts with understanding the problem. They say that if you really get to the root of a problem, most of the solutions reveal themselves. Let's hope our societies learn before the next October 7th in Europe. We too, the Israelis, thought we could get away with soft beliefs, that peace is possible. But when the enemy is working within a 100-year plan for our annihilation through assimilation, that threat needs to be taken very, 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 very seriously. We are seeing the impact of this strategy online, everywhere we go. But here in Israel, we have an army that defends us against ideologies. Europe doesn't. And it's really learning that the hard way. Unfortunately, America is following close behind, closer than they realize, and you should be paying attention. Sleeper cells are rife across the country, and Islamization has really, really started. We need to think about this and focus on this. And if this episode is a little bit less, optimistic than usual, it's for a reason. Because I've been diving in to how sophisticated their strategy is to take over the world. And I've realized that if we don't start yesterday to fight back, to understand it, and to really, really do the work, even if it makes us uncomfortable, to call out the radicalization of our countries, we're in serious, serious trouble. So think about it. Think about what you can do, how you can make the change, where you need to do something in your community to stop your schools, your children's universities really, really becoming the playing ground for Sharia law. I'm Meira, and I'll see you next time.